It's been impossible to ignore recently that corporate news comes at us sort of in an avalanche of headlines, and a lot of those headlines are about scandals. A lot of those headlines are about mistakes. It's not just headlines, it's digital media, social media. Sometimes it sort of seems like everyone suddenly has an opinion, everyone suddenly has a voice, and that voice is shouting. There's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of sort of confusing stuff. But it's important to note that something notable really is actually happening, which is that businesses are being held now to a higher level of accountability. Nearly every day, issues of ethics in business, they finally seem to be kind of breaking through to the public consciousness, to the public discussion. Things like transparency, privacy, technology, monopoly, issues of gender, ethnic, or economic diversity. In these environments, a mission statement's not enough. Not only does a company need to have values that are in common with their constituencies, their employees, their customers, and the community that surrounds them and interacts with them, but those values have to be baked into the core of the business. They have to be part of the product. They have to be part of the team. You have to mean it, and you have to prove it. And if you don't, those audiences we're talking about are going to hold you accountable. Customers are paying attention to how you treat your employees, and your employees are paying attention to how you do business. If those things aren't aligned with their values, they'll walk. We believe that these changes, this progress is real and that it's permanent. Diversity, inclusion, transparency, these aren't buzzwords. They're not just trends or boxes to check, in an annual review. These are requirements of a modern business practice. People a lot of the time used to talk about internet companies. That was a phrase. You'd have like a software-driven insurgent company, someone like, say, Amazon, right? And then there'd be everybody else, the old school. But today, there's really no such thing as an internet company. There's no company that's successful that doesn't have a successful digital strategy. Likewise, at one point, there were companies that thought about purpose and mission and values. Some of those companies would have like a cult customer base, right, like Patagonia, or maybe a reputation for unusually strong relationships with their customers, like, say, Nordstrom, or their employers, like Costco, their employees. And people would think of those as sort of as outliers, as interesting stories, and then there'd be everybody else. But it's 2019, and at this point, there's only one kind of business strategy that's going to work. And that's the kind that takes into account the relationship between the business and those constituencies and the society that it's in. So we founded from day one with the idea that knowing this, now what? What comes next? Now that all these ideas have everyone's attention, what can those of us that are actually in business, that have to wake up tomorrow morning and do something about it, do? How can we consider those social and ethical issues in our business models? How can we incorporate those things from day one? So we've gathered together a really remarkable group of people today that are passionate about these issues and have something to share. And they're also in a position to affect real change within their organizations. You are, if you're here, one of those people. So we're really excited that you're here to share in this discussion, and we're excited to listen and learn from you. So I'd like to thank all those who made today possible, our sponsors. Without them, this would be completely impossible. They are Accelerist, Aon, BetterUp, Blackbaud, the BVA Nudge Unit, DiversityCom, E4E Relief, Fresh Bennies, Jet Dental, Lingo Live, Managed by Q, NPower, Oh My Green, PwC, PricewaterhouseCoopers, Stewart Leadership Institute, and the Pack Shack. And now, I'd like to introduce the first panel of the day. This is called What Makes an Inclusive Leader? It's going to be moderated by Cheryl Hall. She's a journalist at the Dallas Morning News, and she will introduce the rest of the panel. And thank you guys so much.
Good morning. I am Cheryl Hall. I'm a business columnist for the Dallas Morning News. I've been at the Dallas Morning News longer than most of you have been on this earth. I started when I was 20 years old in the business news department 48 years ago. I have to say that I'm the longest surviving member of the newsroom, which is a really good thing for me. Something that might be of interest to you is that in mid-November, we will come out with our top 100 best workplaces in DFW. And I've been doing this now, this is our 11th year of doing it. It is not a pay-for-play publication, it's a for real deal. And what it has given me is an annual update on what the best HR policies and working environments are in North Texas. So I'm really happy to be here moderating this, because I can tell you that the number one item year and year and year after is not about pay and benefits. It's about leadership. Contrary to what you may have heard, people want to be led. They want to have a mission. They want to feel included. And more than anything, they want to feel respected. I've had the opportunities to spend a little time with each one of our speakers, and I can assure you that these are people that you want to hear from. I'm going to have each of them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about why you should listen to them. And I'm going to start with my female counterpart.
Sure. I'm Joan Buccigrossi. I'm the Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Alcon. Prior to Alcon, I was at Rockwell Automation. Prior to that, I was at the Kellogg Company. And then I was actually an independent consultant before that. I've been at Alcon about 2.5 years. You may be aware that we were owned by Novartis until April of this year. And so we spun off and we're independent. We're a 70-year-old company based in Fort Worth. And we not only do what you would know, which is contact lenses and lens care solutions, but we also are the premier maker of surgical eye equipment for glaucoma and cataract surgeries throughout the world.
Bobby?
Good morning, everybody. I'm Bobby Griffin. I'm the head of diversity and inclusion for CBRE. I've been at CBRE for a little over 2 years now. Prior to that, I was the global head of diversity and inclusion for Flowserve Corporation. Prior to that, I was the global head of D&I for Alcon Novartis. So I see they're making improvements, right? CBRE, we're the world's largest commercial real estate company. We focus not only on in the Americas regions, but our Asia Pac regions, our European, our EMEA regions, and so we're global. We work all over. And one of the things I found out, and we'll talk about a little bit more, is diversity and inclusion has different meanings all around the world.
Rick?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rick Wilson. I'm a global director of diversity and inclusion with AT&T. Hopefully you know us as you can see our globe from here. Little over 20 years with AT&T. Started my career in sales and have really kind of just moved around the business, a lot of different HR functional roles. Before I came into this role 4 years ago, I was part of our talent acquisition team doing high volume recruiting for sales and service centers and some of our field operations organizations around the country. I do want to just a little bit about AT&T in case you're not familiar with us. Obviously, most of you, hopefully your cell phones and your service provider at home is running on AT&T. But if you may not know that we also now include some of the Warner Media family of companies like HBO and CNN and a bunch of other entertainment divisions that are now part of our family, in addition to Xandr, which is our new advertising and analytics organization, which is really headquartered in New York City, which is really about making advertising relevant in today's marketplace. And then lastly, we also have a substantial Latin American operations called Vrio, which is really a lot of our traditional satellite TV programming that operates within the Latin American space.
And then we have our young member of the panel, Tyler.
Oh, wow, our young member. You reminded me to silence my phone, too, so
I didn't bring mine.
that would be even smarter. I have a lot to learn. I'm so young, so.
Half my age.
Yeah. So my name is Tyler Muse. I'm the founder and CEO at Lingo Live. Lingo Live is an online coaching platform that helps emerging leaders gain the communication skills and leadership skills that they need to actually move up in the organization. This is a company I started 7 years ago. Prior to this, I worked in finance. I worked for General Electric on their energy financial services group. And I saw the need for kind of communication skill development, and I saw what good leadership looked like. And so that inspired me to start this company, which ironically, I just have to mention this because we did a little stroll down memory lane. The company almost died 5 years ago, after kind of banging my head against the wall, trying to figure out how to make this business work. And the turning point was actually at the convention center, not too far from here, which we just drove past. So it was nice to see that. We went to the convention center kind of thinking, well, maybe the angle is more within corporate. And so we went to a conference where we met with people leaders and learning and development leaders, and we realized this resonates a lot with them. And so that's actually what saved the company. Which my wife appreciated, because I said, I'm not going to give myself a haircut until we reach this revenue milestone. And my hair had gotten down to here. And shortly after that conference, I was able to get a haircut. So it's been a wild ride, but I'm very passionate about leadership. I want to double click on what you said before around good leadership and how important that is within companies. Most employers think that people leave the company for more money, when only 12% of employees do. A majority of employees leave a company because of their boss. They don't leave the company, they leave their boss. So we are trying to help address that challenge.
So I asked each one of our speakers to give us a little peek under the covers, to tell us some of the obstacles that they've had to overcome. And you know, AT&T has this glorious reputation of and deservedly so, of being inclusive and whatever. But Rick, tell us a little bit about what you found when you moved into the job, and what you've done to build on that base.
Sure. Probably the first thing that I would share is there's not a one-size-fits-all when we think about some of the inclusion initiatives, and that applies to leadership across AT&T. And one of the things that we do just as kind of common practices, we are constantly benchmarking. We do that not only against our peer companies within kind of the tech media space, but we also, through a lot of our partnerships with a lot of external organizations like Diversity Inc., like Catalyst, we're always kind of keeping fresh on research, right? So I think, just to show our rooms, how many HR practitioners do we have in the room? Okay, our family. I feel like this is awesome. So this is perfect. So, you know, constantly staying fresh on kind of what's current. And one of the things that we came across, we have a relationship with Catalyst, which is, hopefully all of you know Catalyst. They do a lot of advocacy for women and women in the workplace and men as allies and other diverse segments, but primarily women. One of the things that they had researched and published was around some of the issues that women of color face within the workplace. And they've defined something in the marketplace called emotional tax, which is really just a heightened experience that women who are of color, because of their gender, obviously, but even if their race and ethnicity is a factor in who they are, that creates an additional barrier or experience that sometimes can prohibit them from being their true authentic selves at work and create barriers. So we got really familiar with this research, but we really wanted to see what was happening within the walls of our business. And so we, in the D&I team, actually facilitated a few focus groups with both senior leaders all the way down to what I'll just call like mid-managers, to really ask some questions about their experiences at AT&T. And all these women were high-performing, very successful, high-potential women. And what we heard reflected what we found in the research. So, and I think, just to share, like we currently right now, and we're very proud of this, so I have to just make a little plug. We currently hold #1 right now on the Diversity Inc. ratings for the top 50 corporations. And so we're proud of that, but we also know that that doesn't tell the whole story, right? It's just a number on a paper. So that's why we started down this journey. So anyway, to make a long story short, what we heard from the women that work at AT&T is that their experiences were very, very similar to what was in the research. And so we set out to figure out, how do we address that? And so what we've done this year is we started a development program specifically for AT&T women of color that really takes them through an 8-month journey to really understand, how do you build your brand, how do you break through some of those barriers, and how do you create a sisterhood across the company of like women of color to be successful at AT&T. But one of the key ingredients in that is, it's not just all about the women. The supervisors need to come along for that too. And so we incorporated a whole supervisor track in this training because, as we just heard, people don't leave a company, they leave their boss. And so if these women are not supported, we know that their supervisors need to be fully on board to make sure that they continue to be successful. And so that's one of the things that we've been doing this year because, again, a number one rating doesn't really translate to much if your employees are not feeling good about their experiences at work. And so one thing that I will say, and then I'll close on this, is we found, while we thought it was great to bring the supervisors along for that journey, it hasn't been easy. So
And you do it separately, right?
We do, yeah. They're separate tracks, separate experiences for the supervisors. Some of the supervisors, quite honestly, have been, at the very beginning, were very disengaged. They didn't understand why they needed to go through, or even why women of color might have a different experience than another woman or any other employee. So we've had to work through that, and again, it goes to getting the engagement and having one-on-one conversation. So I think regardless of the size of your organization, one key takeaway that I would say is you need to have conversations with the supervisors of these organizations to really understand where their head is and what their understanding of inclusion and why it's important for an organization.
Well, and that does bring up one of the big problems is that oftentimes the managers don't recognize that there is a problem.
Right.
That wow, everything's going good by my book.
Right.
So, Bobby, we talked about the holes in the bucket, and expand on that.
One of the opportunities that we have in commercial real estate, similar to what Rick said, we have to take a holistic approach. What we are focusing on attracting, developing, and retaining diverse talent in the organization. And what we found that even when we had been more successful in attracting that talent, we tend to lose diverse talent at a much higher rate than non-diverse talent. And our hole in the bucket challenge and opportunity. So we had to look into, okay, why is it happening? What's going on there? And what can we do about that? And some of the things we've done is that targeted development. Said we have a targeted development opportunities to make sure that we are not only developing and engaging diverse talent at a high rate. Because if people if they don't feel included, they won't be engaged. All these companies do engagement surveys, but sometimes we don't realize the impact on inclusion.
The word engaged.
Yeah, on engaged. If you don't include me, I may stay around and I may do my job and keep my nose clean so you can't fire me, but I'm not going to be engaged as I otherwise would be.
Or the phone listening.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So people will either quit or worse, they'll quit and stay. So we've all known people on teams who quit and stay. They're still there, but they've been gone for a long time. But one of the programs that we're most proud of is called our Impact Program, and where we take high potential diverse talent over an 18-month period and give them targeted development, both in person and virtual over that period of time. Targeted mentoring and sponsorship as well, because mentoring is one thing, sponsorship is another. And so that's one of the activities or initiatives that we found has been successful that has helped. And for those individuals who've gone through that program, we saw that the retention rate is much higher. The promotion rate is much higher as well.
Well, it reminds me of Rick's predecessor. One of her favorite sayings is, it's one thing to be asked to the party, it's another thing to be asked to dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's one more piece of that, and we all heard the saying, diversity is being invited to the dance, and inclusion is being asked to dance, and belonging is being taught how to dance. And so we've often gone to places where we know how to dance, where it may be good dancers, we just don't know the dance here. And every organization has a dance, every team has a dance, just somebody needs to teach you that dance.
Joan, you had the opportunity to come in and first of all, tell us why you joined Alcon, and then what the opportunity that it offered.
Yeah, so when I left Rockwell, I was going to go back and start my consulting practice up again, and was not going to go back into another organization, quite frankly. I've done both. They have their advantages and disadvantages. I love being inside an organization because you're privy to conversations that you wouldn't otherwise be, let's dial the phone and call this person. You're in talent reviews. You're hearing code words like, I don't know, that woman's got rough edges. And you're like, well, what does that mean? And how come he doesn't have rough edges? And so when I got the call, actually from the head of D&I in Novartis to consider Alcon, there were a couple of things that made me want to come. Was the size of the organization at around 20,000 people, very manageable in terms of reaching all of the leaders and managers and associates in that size organization, the global footprint, the mission. But I have to say the fact that the cultural history was really intriguing to me. So Alcon started 70 years ago in Fort Worth. It was then bought by Nestle. There was a short period of time when it was independent again. And then about 10 years ago was bought by Novartis and was a division of Novartis. And so when I was talking to the folks at Alcon about coming, they had already knew that it was likely Novartis was going to spin us off and we were going to become independent again. And there was a new group of leaders in roles that were really there to facilitate all of that and stand us back up again as an independent company. So if you think about that cultural journey, how varied that is, and how much cultural agility leaders have to have over that kind of period of time, and those kinds of interactions with parent companies, now going IPO, now we, instead of reporting to the parent company, we report to Wall Street. That's a very different kind of reporting relationship. And so I was really fascinated with the cultural shift that leaders needed to make through all of those changes. And that what I thought that I could add to the party was that if they were doing it, if they saw inclusive leadership as a key leadership skill and capability, that they would be able to make that shift to independence in a very robust kind of way. And so a lot of the work that I've been doing since I've been at Alcon is really around engaging the leadership. To your point, Rick, about, you have to have the supervisors in place. If women and people of color, if we could have fixed this ourselves, we would have done it 200 years ago. But we need the people who are in power and in the positions of influence to be allies and partners in the work. And they often don't know how to do that. And they're not doing it because they don't want to or they think it's not the right thing to do, but they often don't know how. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing over these last 2.5 years is around helping the leaders who are already in place understand what their role is in order to do inclusive leadership. What does that look like? How are things that I'm not aware of, as you said earlier, getting in my way or harming my relationships or causing someone not to be able to fully contribute? And then what do I need to do and adjust in order to make that different? And so that's where we've really been concentrating here.
The head of one of the major accounting firms recently told me that on one of her performance reviews, she was told that she was too bubbly, that she needed not to be bubbly. Well, somehow being bubbly got her to the head of the major accounting firm. But anyway, there has always been a dual standards for what is, I had the bit, pardon my French, but I had, when I was business editor, and back in the good days, I had 56 people reporting to me, and our sports department had even more, but we were considered the two franchise organizations. And when Dave Smith, the executive sports editor, did something, he was just standing up for his people. When I did the same thing, I was a B, So it's,
Yep.
And that wasn't all that long ago. Yeah. So Tyler, you've done both the corporate and the not so corporate. Are the challenges the same?
No, I would say the challenges are very different. So Lingo Live, we have 30 employees, and then we have 150 coaches worldwide. GE, I think, had 300,000 employees when I left. So certainly
They missed you in one.
Yeah, there you go. Certainly major differences, but one of the themes that I think is coming up in what we're talking about, and a thing that we preach very heavily, is around self-awareness. So as a leader, your job is to create trust and psychological safety with the people that you work with so that they can express their authentic self, or they can express things that are on their mind, or give you feedback, or have a difficult conversation. And I saw that, in terms of good leaders, bad leaders at GE, as well as here in my own personal journey, becoming a better leader, is a lot of it boils down to how self-aware that individual is. And when I say self-awareness, I know that's kind of a broad topic, but I think there's really two elements of it. One is, what's your own level of emotional intelligence? What are your own strengths? What are some of your own limiting beliefs, your inner critic, that can get you more in tune and accepting of who you are as a person, instead of trying to mimic some idea of what a leader is supposed to be. You can come across you can root your leadership in a much more, in a way that's much more grounded in what is authentic to your own style and your own values. And the other part of that is understanding your position as a person in society. And so for me, as a straight white male, I've had tremendous privilege and have had tremendous privilege my entire life. And so that journey of self-awareness also takes that into consideration. Like, where are you coming from versus the woman on the team who is bubbly, or has rough edges? Maybe you don't understand what it's like to live in, in this country, in this society, but work in this workplace as somebody who comes from an entirely different type of experience in that exact same environment because of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation. And that's a huge piece of self-awareness, absolutely. And so I think leaders who are able to really dig in and be humble and be honest about themselves and the things that they're working on and the things that they view as their strengths, and give that critical, honest feedback, but also be open to things outside of their own kind of environment of how they understand the world because of their own privilege, is really essential. And it's something that we push. That's in our product. When we work with new leaders, a lot of people come to us because they want to figure out how to mitigate conflict on their team, or run more effective meetings, like these very tactical skills. That's a big piece of what we offer. But before you get into any skill, we're going to start a self-awareness foundations course, and you're going to spend 6 sessions with your coach really digging into what those strengths are, but also what those limiting beliefs are, what your level of emotional intelligence may be, who's your inner critic. We'll oftentimes give that person a name, like, who's that inner critic? One of my direct reports, her inner critic is Pamela, and she brings Pamela up all the time. She kind of says, hey, this may be Pamela doing her thing, but here's kind of how I'm feeling. Here's something that's on my mind. Here's what I'm struggling with. And as a leader, you've got to sit in that space, and you've got to be aware that you can't possibly understand what's going on here. A lot of this has to do with her own experience, which is very different from your own. You've got to listen. You've got to create that psychological safety. And then you've got to take action. And if you don't know how to solve it yourself, you've got to find someone who can help you do it. So I think if you ground any type of leadership development initiatives in self-awareness, you'll see much better returns on investment.
I love the phrase psychological safety, but there's also a fine line where, let's face it, some employees need a reality check.
Yeah.
And so how do you walk that fine line?
You need that psychological safety. Oh, sorry.
No, you go, and then Joan wants
And
to
I'll
weigh
join
in.
in.
Okay, yeah. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this, Joan. I think psychological safety is critical to giving that direct, honest, constructive feedback. If you do that from a place of, not having that safety, not having that trust, then the person receiving it is not going to receive it openly. They're going to view you as the person that they've, constructed in their head as somebody that doesn't have their best interests at heart, is trying to undermine them, trying to attack them, rather than someone who's invested in that relationship with me, has my best interests at heart, understands where I'm coming from, but ultimately holds me accountable as my leader, and you've got to take that.
Yes, I once told a reporter that it was kind of inappropriate, in business news at least, to wear knee-high socks with Dr. Scholl's sandals, that this was not necessarily going to impress the CEO of a company. Betsy didn't quite agree, but she stopped wearing the knee-high striped socks with the Dr. Scholl sandals. Joan?
Yeah, I think we do a lot of work around psychological safety based on some of the work that Amy Edmondson has done. And I think it's really important that you emphasize in any of these discussions that this doesn't mean anything goes, right? It doesn't mean that inclusiveness doesn't mean that we don't have common business goals or we don't have values and ethics that we have to stay connected to. Because I think sometimes critics of these conversations around psychological safety or inclusiveness want to say then that we're going to have mayhem, like everything is just going to be, anybody can do anything and we're not going to get any work done. Of course, the bottom line is always we're here to do something. We have a shared purpose that we're here to do. And if we are creating a psychologically safe environment, if we are being inclusive, it means everybody's able to bring their best to that shared interest. Not that we are all just going to have, I get to do anything that I want. So accountability is a big part of it. And as I think a really important part of what you say is that the ability to give feedback. What I've learned in organizations when you're not part of the dominant group, whatever group you belong to, when you're not part of the dominant group, it can be difficult for the dominant group to give you feedback, right? So one of the things that happen for women of color, people of color in organizations is they're being talked about like that in a talent review. She's got rough edges, but nobody's coaching her. Nobody's giving her any feedback. Nobody's saying what that's about. What do you have to do in order to improve or change? And a lot of that comes, and I think your self-awareness piece is really important, from their own inability to feel comfortable having those conversations. So then the person who needs the feedback isn't getting it, and then eventually it just spirals out of control in some way. So that safety to have difficult conversations when it's about performance is really critical.
So is there a difference in diversity and inclusiveness, Bobby?
Oh, definitely. And there are different definitions out there, but diversity just means difference.
Yeah.
There's no one gender or ethnicity that has a monopoly on diversity. We're all different in so many different ways. But inclusion is the real, secret sauce. We call it inclusion, and is really where diversity impacts the individuals, impacts the corporation, impacts the business in general. One of the things that we say at CBRE is, we lead with inclusion to impact diversity. Diversity is not our goal. We think many companies have it backwards. Inclusion is, because we know that if we're inclusive in the way that we're attracting, developing, and retaining talent, the outcome or indicator will be diversity. And in inclusion, another way to think about it and look at it, many organizations, especially organizations with strong cultures, what we really expect is assimilation instead of integration. Come in, resistance is futile. Come in and be this way. Now, we like the difference you bring to the table or in the interview setting, but many organizations, we try to snuff that out as quickly as possible. One of the biggest isms in corporate America, you hear about all these isms, is quote unquote round hereism. This is the way we do things around here. And even if no one tells you that specifically, you saw what happened to somebody who didn't do that. And you saw how their career, and you go, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to step in line. And you lose that creativity. You have to, a part of you and what a part of the value you bring to the organization is not included in that. And so
Rick, we didn't discuss this, but just what do you think the firing of the CEO of McDonald's for having an inappropriate relationship tells to the leadership of America?
wow.
Putting you on the spot.
I know, right?
I mean, is that a true bellwether signal?
Zero tolerance.
Huh?
Zero tolerance, absolutely. It's just not okay. I mean, and I'm sure we all know people who met their spouses or are dating people, and I just think that we have a room full of HR practitioners. This is you have to be very careful with that, very careful.
And Tyler, I told everybody on the panel that I set like 3 alarm clocks, and my husband, who's out of town, his went off, and it was on the ticket. And they had this big discussion about whether or not players should automatically hug each other, or and I cracked up that the ticket was having about to hug or not, to kiss or not, and
what curveball are you going to throw at me now? Yeah.
Well, you mentioned that you have a young generation and you're teaching them etiquette, and it is a different environment. What kind of coaching do you tell leaders about the appropriateness of, the Wall Street Journal once did a story on what cities are hugging cities, and Dallas was #1 in America about being a hugging city. And New York was like behind Boston in 1, 2 of no. But now it's the side hug. So what do what is appropriate in terms of leadership and showing affection to your employees, or showing? I mean, is it a no hug world?
Well, it's interesting. So for 2 things. One, we're distributed as a company, so there's not a lot of physical contact potential anyways, because most of our meetings are happening over video conference.
And so are your lessons. So
and the sessions as well. That being said, we do have an office in San Francisco, and it is definitely a hugging office. I'll tell you, every time it's like a running joke. When I go there every other week, and it's always hugs around, everybody hugs. That's very much a part of the culture of that office, and it's very much accepted. It feels authentic. It feels genuine. But the New York office, not as much. Like, it would be weird. And sometimes the San Francisco people come to New York and their arms wide open. And the New Yorkers are like, hey, no, yeah, it's good to see you, but not that good. Like, sit down, let's get our work done. So,
and that does bring up the point of culture. And I believe I'm giving the 5-minute or whatever sign. Is that not another key? Know your culture. I mean, create the culture you want to live with. I mean,
yeah, sure. I was actually thinking of that when Bobby was talking about kind of the assimilation and giving feedback. We've been talking a lot about giving feedback to our employees, and I just have personal experience with that. I have 3 team members right now, and they're all very, very diverse. And I have one who it goes to everything that we were saying about creating a safe space and having that relationship and trust. But I do have one direct report who she is just very unique. Like, she's very different, and like we had to have a conversation about how she was showing up to some conferences, because while it was clear it was not inappropriate, it just didn't align with the audiences that she was engaging with. And so we had to do that. And as I walked into that conversation, I thought, okay, she's diverse from me, and I don't want to end up with like an EEO suit, right? So I think there's this balance as we think, in all seriousness, we think about, we need to give direct feedback. Sometimes it touches upon things that do go into like the diversity space, and we just need to have the relationship. It goes to that trust, the psychological safe space, and really building that, because as leaders, I don't think any of us can have those conversations without it. Otherwise, we're just not going to be successful. And actually, the conversation with my direct report went really well. She's, she didn't necessarily agree with my feedback, and I had actually not even attended the conference. I actually got reports from other people who were there. And I thought, okay, well, this is rising to the level where other people are commenting. I need to take action as her supervisor.
Again, it's coaching versus reprimand.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It was nothing that was,
Joan?
And it's working that muscle. We do something in the training that we do at Alcon, which we call scenario training. So from any particular group that I'm working with, I rely on folks like you to tell me stories about things that they've heard, and then I create scenarios. I sort of mush them together so nobody can be identified, and we practice. So if this happened and you were the supervisor, what would you do? If this happened and you were a peer, what would you do? If this happened, what would you like to do, but would you be afraid to do? You know, like we really spend time talking about it, because if you not practiced at it, first of all, you have to see it. Secondly, you have to know that it's going on differently for someone else than it is for you. And then you have to have some skills to start having those conversations. And when you're in an environment where you can sit with your coworkers and practice, that goes a lot better. And then you've got a cohort of allies that you can say, you know, Bobby, I'm gonna deal with this situation. Here's how I think I'm gonna say it. What do you think? Am I on track? You know, I have somewhere to go, so I can actually check that out before I actually try to do it.
That's an excellent point. One of the things that we do inclusive leadership training in the organization, and one of the key aspects of that is that scenario training. So to give people that opportunity to practice, because D&I conversations aren't always easy. Progress in the D&I space is sometimes stumbling forward. And in that stumbling forward in individual relationships and conversations, and stumbling forward with leadership. But the key is moving forward and having those conversations that are sometimes uncomfortable and not as smooth as we'd like them to be.
Well, I'll ask one last question. Is the white male, does he feel included today?
I'll take that. And, go ahead.
I think it's
No, I mean,
So, you know, well, are you talking at work or are you talking in society? I mean,
well,
it's
I'm
it's
actually
really
at work.
broad-
I mean,
it's-
there's
yeah,
all these
that's a broad question.
I mean, this is something that actually I hear from readers, you know,
No,
you
that's-
know, they'll say, hey, this is all great, but what about me? I'm 45 and stuck in a job and I'm white male and I have no prospects of being promoted because it's all going to someone else.
Well, I'll go, this is Rick, because we didn't plant this question, but that's really timely because that's actually something that we are looking at right now, because all the organizations up here, we focus so much on diversity, but we are hearing from our own employees too, the straight white males, particularly those that are middle-aged, that are just, you know, I'm being left behind, my voice isn't being heard, you know, all those things that, you know, can come out of diversity initiatives or inclusion initiatives. And so I would just, to answer that, I said, I think some straight white men don't feel included in their voices, but here's where I see hope, and their voices are being heard. And so we're having conversations, and that's I think the key is the conversations.
That's my question about diversity versus inclusiveness.
Yeah.
You know,
the conversations matter, and we as HR practitioners need to equip our organizations with, I don't want to say a talk track, but we need to educate. And so we need to listen, because every voice is, that's another thing our prior chief diversity officer used to say, is every voice matters. So regardless of what your identity, because, you know, if you are, and again, pick on the straight white men, you know, you have identities too, right? Your faith, your education, your military status, like you have identities that matter too. So let's talk about the whole self as opposed to just one aspect of diversity, if that makes sense.
well, I'd like to thank our panel. I think you